I'm Sonia, and in this video, I want to read some Neville Goddard to you guys. This is the collection of all of Neville's books, and I've read through this somewhat recently, and as I'm thinking about, my journey and what I wanted to film today, I wanted to read a couple of stories that are in Neville's book, The Power of Awareness. So chapter 23 is called Case Histories, and he tells some stories from his experience and some of his clients' experiences when it comes to applying the law of assumption to their lives. And these two stories, they go together. They actually, one mentions the other because it was the story that Neville was using to teach in the second story. You'll understand when I get there. But I just wanted to read these two stories because these two stories really helped me understand how simple manifestation is, and that it doesn't have to be super complicated. A few things about Neville. Neville was a visualizer. He was very big on visualization. He was big on SATs, the state akin to sleep. So what he would do is he would visualize as he was falling asleep, and then he wouldn't think against his manifestations, which he talks about a little bit, but he talks way more about the imagination than like the visualizing as you're falling asleep than anything else. But he does talk about in his books about not thinking against what you want to be experiencing. Anyway, so I just thought I'd come and read these couple stories to you guys and, give you just another way of looking at manifesting, seeing it, and kind of seeing how it is applied and how Neville was applying it. So the first story is actually about Neville. And if you go on YouTube and search Neville, you'll find snippets from lectures of him telling this story. The parts that are not in the book that I've heard him talking about in lectures online are that when this happened, Neville was 38 years old. He was drafted into the military in the United States to fight in World War II, and he manifested himself out of the military, and this is the story of how he did that. All right, so this one starts off. This is a story with every detail of which I am personally familiar, meaning that this is Neville's story. This is what he did, right? In the spring of 1943, a recently drafted soldier was stationed in a large army camp in Louisiana. He was intensely eager to get out of the army, but only in an entirely honorable way. Only in an entirely honorable way. That was the only way he wanted out. The only way he could do this was to apply for a discharge. The application then required the approval of his commanding officer to become effective. Based on Army regulations, the decision of the commanding officer was final and could not be appealed. The soldier, following all the necessary procedures, applied for a discharge. Within 4 hours, his application was returned marked disapproved. Convinced he could not appeal the decision to any higher authority, military or civilian, he turned within to his own consciousness, determined to rely on the law of assumption. So even though they told him no, he was like, no, we'll see what happens. I know that the only real consciousness, the only real reality is the one that I imagine. So the soldier realized that his consciousness was the only reality, that his particular state of consciousness determined the events he would encounter, meaning what he was telling himself and thinking in here was what was going to end up happening. Even if he didn't know how, they told him no. Everything told him no, but he said, no, I'm getting what I want. That night, in the interval between getting into bed and falling asleep, he He concentrated on consciously using the law of assumption. In imagination, he felt himself to be in his own apartment in New York. He visualized his apartment. That is, in his mind's eye, he actually saw his apartment, mentally picturing each one of the familiar rooms with all the furnishings vividly real. With this picture clearly visualized and laying on his back, he completely relaxed physically. In this way, he induced a state bordering on sleep. That's SATS. At the same time, retaining control of the direction of his attention. When his body was completely immobilized, he assumed that he was in his own room and felt himself to be laying in his own bed. A very different feeling from that of laying on an army cot. In imagination, he rose from the bed, walked from room to room, touching various pieces of furniture. When he went to the window and, with his hands resting on the sill, looked out on the street with which his apartment faced. So vivid was all of this in his imagination that he saw the detail in the pavement, the railing, the trees, and the familiar brick of the building on the opposite side of the street. He then returned to his bed and felt himself drifting off to sleep. He knew that it was most important in his successful use of the law that at the actual point of falling asleep, his consciousness be filled with the assumption that he was already what he wanted to be. All that he did in imagination was based on the assumption that he was no longer in the army. Night after night, the soldier enacted the drama. Night after night, in imagination, he felt himself honorably discharged back in his home, seeing all the familiar surroundings and falling asleep in his own bed. This continued for 8 nights. For 8 days, his objective experience continued to be directly opposite to his subjective experience and consciousness each night before going to sleep. On the 9th day, orders came through from headquarters for the soldier to fill out a new application for his discharge. Shortly after this was done, he was ordered to report to his colonel's office. During the discussion, the colonel asked him if he still desired getting out of the army. Upon receiving an affirmative reply, the colonel said that he personally disagreed, and while he had strong objections to approving of the discharge, he had decided to overlook these objections and to approve it. Within a few hours, the application was approved, and the soldier, now a civilian, was on a train bound for home. So when I read that story, I'm like, okay, there's some things there. First of all, you can get exactly what you want. He wanted an honorable discharge. He fucking got it. 2, it doesn't take months, weeks, years, decades to get shit you want. It can happen very quickly. 9 days is not that long. And 3, that like I said, I know Neville was big on the visualizing thing. I can't visualize. Like, I don't see the details like Neville did. And that's where reading somebody like Joseph Murphy, who I have heard this from multiple people, but supposedly the same person, Abdullah, who taught Neville, also taught Joseph Murphy. Joseph Murphy doesn't talk about seeing things vividly. He talks about more affirmations or thinking sentences, more like kind of prayers, I would say, because they're not, to me, an affirmation is shorter. His are like paragraphs long of things. But all Neville did was ignore what was happening in his in front of his face and decided to tell himself that he was getting what he wanted. That's what he did, and it happened. Okay? So then we go to the other story. And this one was the one that I went, oh, I'm making this way harder than it needs to be. All right, so this is This is the story of a very unexpected result of an interview with a lady who came to consult with me. So this is Neville talking, obviously. One afternoon, a young grandmother, a businesswoman in New York, came to see me. She brought along her 9-year-old grandson who was visiting her from his home in Pennsylvania. In response to her questions, I explained the law of assumption, describing in detail the procedure to be followed in attaining an object. The boy sat quietly, apparently absorbed in a small toy truck, while I explained to his grandmother the method of assuming the state of consciousness that would be hers or her desire already fulfilled. I told her the story of the soldier in camp who each night fell asleep imagining himself to be in his own bed in his own home, which is why I'm like the two stories go together. So he told her the same story that I just read you. When the boy and his grandmother were leaving, he looked up at me with great excitement and said, "I know what I want, and now I know how to get it." That's the part that like stuck out to me. I know what I want, and now I know how to get it. Surprised, I asked him what it was he wanted. He told me he had his heart set on a puppy. To this, his grandmother viciously protested, telling the boy that it had been made clear repeatedly that he could not have a dog under any circumstances, that his father and mother would not allow it, and that the boy was too young to care for it properly, and furthermore, the father had a deep dislike for dogs and actually hated to have one around. All these were arguments the boy, passionately delirious of having a dog, refused to understand. "Now I know what to do," he said. "Every night, just as I'm going off to sleep, I'm going to pretend that I have a dog and we are going for a walk." "No," the grandmother said. "This is not what Mr. Neville means. This is not meant for you. You can't have a dog." Approximately 6 weeks later, the grandmother told me what was to her an astonishing story. The boy's desire to own a dog was so intense that he had absorbed all that I had told his grandmother of how to obtain one's desire, and he believed implicably that at last he knew how to get a dog. Putting this belief to practice, for many nights the boy imagined a dog was lying in his bed beside him. In imagination, he petted the dog, actually feeling its fur. Things like playing with the dog and taking it for walks filled his mind. Within a few weeks, it happened. A newspaper in the city in which the boy lived organized a special program in conjunction with Kindness to Animals Week. All school children were requested to write an essay on why I would like to own a dog. After entries from all the schools were submitted and judged, the winner of the contest was announced. The very same boy who weeks before in my apartment in New York had told me, "Now I know how to get a dog," was the winner. In an elaborate ceremony, which was publicized with stories and pictures in the newspaper, the boy was awarded a beautiful collie puppy. In relating this story, the grandmother told me that if the boy had been given the money to which to buy a dog, the parents would have refused to do so and would have used it to buy a bond for the boy or put it in the savings bank for him. Furthermore, if someone had made the boy a gift of a dog, they would have refused it or given it away. But the dramatic manner in which the boy got the dog, the way he won the citywide contest, the stories and pictures in the newspaper, the pride of achievement and joy of the boy himself, all combined to bring about a change of heart in the parents. They found themselves doing what they never conceived possible. They allowed him to keep the dog. All this the grandmother explained to me, and she concluded by saying that there was one particular kind of dog on which the boy had set his heart. It was a collie. When I read this story, the part that stuck out to me was, now I know how to get what I want. I tell myself I have it and let the rest of it go. I have it. I have my dog. I have a dog. I have a dog. I have a dog. When I read this story, it brought up a lot of past times where I was doing that and didn't even realize that that's what I was doing, and realizing that those were the times when I got what I wanted, whether I was trying to or not, because I wasn't aware that that's what I was doing, but that's what I was doing. This story also gave me more bull stories, actually, with, you know, law of attraction being like, oh, you'll get this or something better. No, he wanted a fucking collie and he got a collie. Neville wanted out of the military, honorably discharged, and he got out of the military honorably discharged. You can literally have whatever you want as long as you're willing to tell yourself that you already have it and that it's already true. That's the key to all of it. And those two stories, for some reason, them together just really enlightened me, I would say, when I first read them. So I just was figuring out what I wanted to film for today and saw this book on my shelf and was like, let's read some Neville stories, because those, I love Neville. There's a lot, I don't agree with Neville. Like I said, the whole imagining thing I have a really hard time with, but I can tell myself that things are the way I want them to be. I can do that. You can do that. If you can imagine it, imagine it. That's where I will stand by, you need to do what works for you. So if imagining works for you, then do that. And if it doesn't, then do it the way that it works for you. But the base of all of it, the law, is whatever you tell yourself is what you're going to experience. It's going to become true. Thank you so much for watching. Love and light.